The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle, as Sergeant Major William Thompson adjusted his red tunic for what he believed would be another ordinary day. At 52 years old, Thompson had dedicated 28 years of his life to the Queen's Guard, standing motionless for hours, protecting the royal family with unwavering loyalty. His weathered face told stories of countless ceremonies, state visits, and quiet moments of duty that the public never witnessed. Thompson had seen 3 generations of royals grow up behind the castle walls. He remembered when Prince William was just a mischievous boy running through the corridors, and later watched Prince George take his first wobbly steps in the private gardens. The young prince, now 10 years old, had always been different from other royal children Thompson had observed. While his siblings were more outgoing and playful, George possessed a quiet intelligence that seemed far beyond his years. On this particular Tuesday morning, Thompson noticed something unusual in Prince George's behavior during the changing of the guard ceremony. The young prince stood at his bedroom window, not with the usual curiosity of a child watching the pageantry, but with an intense focus that made Thompson feel as though he was being truly seen for the first time in decades. Their eyes met briefly, and George offered a small, knowing nod that sent an unexpected chill down the veteran guard's spine. The ceremony proceeded as it had thousands of times before, but Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to unfold. As he marched in perfect formation with his fellow guards, he found himself reflecting on the conversations he'd overheard in recent weeks. Palace staff had been whispering about Prince George's growing awareness of social issues, his questions about inequality, and his surprising depth of understanding about the responsibilities that would one day rest on his shoulders. Later that afternoon, as Thompson stood at his post near the castle's main entrance, a young page approached him with an unusual request. Prince George had specifically asked to speak with Sergeant Major Thompson in the castle's library at 4 o'clock. In all his years of service, Thompson had never received such a direct invitation from any member of the royal family. The formal protocol was always maintained, with communication flowing through proper channels and hierarchies. The library was quiet when Thompson entered, his polished boots echoing softly on the ancient wooden floors. Prince George sat in a leather chair that seemed too large for his small frame, surrounded by books on history, governance, and social justice. The sight was both touching and remarkable, a 10-year-old boy grappling with concepts that many adults never fully comprehend. "Sergeant Major Thompson," Prince George began, his voice carrying a gravity that seemed borrowed from someone much older. "I've been watching you and the other guards for a long time. I've been thinking about what it means to serve and what it means to lead." The young prince's words were carefully chosen, each one delivered with a precision that caught Thompson off guard. Thompson stood at attention, unsure of how to respond to such an unprecedented situation. In all his training, no one had prepared him for a philosophical discussion with a future king who was still young enough to lose teeth. Yet here was Prince George, speaking with a wisdom that seemed to transcend his age, asking questions that cut to the very heart of duty, service, and the nature of leadership itself. The conversation that followed would change everything Thompson thought he knew about the royal family, about his own purpose, and about the future of the monarchy. Prince George's words, though spoken softly and with the innocence of youth, carried a power that would resonate through the halls of the palace and ultimately lead to a decision that would shock the entire royal household. As the afternoon light filtered through the library's tall windows, casting a golden glow on the young prince's serious face, Thompson realized he was witnessing something extraordinary, the emergence of a future king who would challenge everything the monarchy had traditionally represented. The quiet revolution had begun with a simple conversation between a seasoned guard and a 10-year-old prince, and nothing would ever be the same again. Prince George closed the heavy book he had been reading and looked directly at Thompson with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of royal wisdom despite belonging to a child. "I've been reading about the French Revolution," he said quietly, "and I keep wondering why people became so angry with kings and queens. My tutors say it was because the royals forgot they were supposed to serve the people, not the other way around." Thompson felt sweat forming beneath his ceremonial helmet despite the cool library air. No member of the royal family had ever spoken to him about such serious matters, and certainly never questioned the very foundations of monarchy itself. He remained silent, trained to listen rather than engage in political discussions, but Prince George seemed to interpret his silence as permission to continue. "Every day, I watch you and the other guards stand perfectly still for hours," the young prince continued, rising from his chair and walking to the window. "You protect us because it's your duty, because you believe in something bigger than yourself. But I wonder sometimes if we're worthy of that protection. I wonder if we're doing enough to deserve your loyalty." The words hit Thompson like a physical blow. In nearly 3 decades of service, he had never questioned his duty or the worthiness of those he protected. The royal family simply was. They existed as a fundamental truth, like the sun rising each morning or the Thames flowing through London. Yet here was Prince George, the future head of that very institution, questioning its basic premise. "Your Royal Highness," Thompson began carefully, then stopped. He realized he had no idea how to respond to such profound questions from someone so young. The training manual had covered protocol for threats, emergencies, and ceremonial duties, but nothing about existential conversations with precocious royal children. Prince George turned back from the window, and Thompson was struck by how the afternoon light seemed to age the boy's face, creating shadows that made him appear far older than his 10 years. "I've been watching the news with my parents," George said. "There are people sleeping on the streets just miles from here. There are children who don't have enough food, while we have rooms in this castle that no one has used in years." Thompson's throat felt dry. He had grown up in a working-class family in Manchester before joining the military, and eventually the Queen's Guard. He knew poverty intimately, had experienced the gnawing uncertainty of not knowing where the next meal would come from, but those memories felt distant now, softened by decades of steady employment and the comfortable routine of palace life. "I asked my father why we can't just sell some of our paintings and help those people," Prince George continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "He said it's complicated, that the monarchy has responsibilities and traditions that must be maintained. But I don't understand why tradition should matter more than people suffering." The young prince walked over to a massive oil painting of King George III, studying the ornate frame and the stern expression of his ancestor. "This king lost America because he couldn't listen to what people really needed," George said thoughtfully. "I don't want to be the king who loses everything because I was too proud or too scared to change." Thompson felt his world shifting beneath his feet. He had devoted his life to protecting and serving an institution that he had always believed was inherently good and necessary. The thought that his service might be sustaining something that needed fundamental change had never occurred to him. Yet Prince George's words carried an undeniable truth that resonated in the deepest part of his conscience. "Sergeant Major Thompson," the prince said, turning to face him directly, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If you knew that your service was helping to maintain a system that kept good people from having better lives, would you still serve?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge that could not be ignored. Thompson looked into the young prince's earnest face and saw not just a child, but a future king who was already grappling with the weight of moral responsibility that would define his reign. For the first time in his career, Thompson understood that his answer to this question would matter far beyond the walls of the castle library. Thompson stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of Prince George's question pressing down on him like the heavy ceremonial armor he wore during state occasions. The library around them seemed to hold its breath, as if even the ancient books sensed the gravity of this moment. Finally, Thompson spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your Royal Highness, I joined the Guard because I believed in serving something greater than myself. I thought that meant serving the crown, serving tradition, serving the idea of Britain itself." He paused, struggling to find words for feelings he had never been forced to examine. "But if I'm honest, I've never really thought about whether those things I'm serving are actually serving the people they're supposed to protect." Prince George nodded solemnly, as if Thompson's answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "My grandmother, the Queen, she tells me stories about during the war, when the royal family stayed in London during the bombing. She says the monarchy was strongest when it suffered alongside the people, but I wonder if we've forgotten how to suffer, how to really understand what ordinary people go through." Thompson watched as the young prince moved to another bookshelf, pulling out a worn volume about British social history. The ease with which George navigated these complex texts was remarkable. But more impressive was his ability to connect abstract concepts to real human experiences. "I've been corresponding with children my age from different backgrounds," Prince George continued, opening the book to a page marked with a ribbon. "My tutors arranged it as part of my education about modern Britain. One boy named Marcus, he's from Liverpool. His father lost his job 6 months ago, and Marcus had to stop playing football because his family couldn't afford the equipment anymore." The prince's voice grew quieter, more reflective. "Marcus wrote that he doesn't hate the royal family, but he doesn't understand why we have so much when his family has so little. He asked if I ever feel guilty about it. I wrote back and told him yes, I do feel guilty. Every single day." Thompson felt something crack inside his chest. In all his years of service, he had focused on the ceremony, the tradition, the honor of his position. He had never considered the perspective of someone like Marcus, someone whose life was made harder by the very inequalities that the monarchy, however unintentionally, helped to maintain. "What did your parents say when they read that letter?" Thompson asked, surprising himself by speaking without being directly addressed. The informality felt strange but somehow necessary. "They didn't read it," Prince George replied. "I decided not to show them. I knew they would worry that I was being influenced by ideas that might be dangerous to the monarchy. But I think the dangerous thing would be if I never questioned what we do, if I just accepted everything without thinking about whether it's right." Prince George closed the book and set it aside, then walked over to a window that looked out onto the castle grounds. Thompson could see several guards in the distance, standing at their posts with the same unwavering dedication he had shown for decades. The sight, which had always filled him with pride, now filled him with a complex mixture of respect and unease. "I've made a decision," the young prince said, still gazing out the window. "When I become king, I want to change how the monarchy works. I want us to really serve the people, not just represent tradition. I want to use our resources to help solve problems, not just to maintain buildings and ceremonies that most people never see." Thompson's heart began to race. The implications of what Prince George was saying were enormous. A monarchy that truly served the people rather than expecting to be served could transform British society in ways that no one could fully predict. "But there's something I need to understand first," George continued, turning back to face Thompson. "I need to know if the people who serve the crown are serving it because they believe in what it could become or just because they've always done it. I need to know if people like you would stand with me when I try to change things, or if you would see change as a betrayal of everything you've dedicated your life to." The question struck Thompson with the force of a revelation. Prince George wasn't just asking about loyalty to the crown. He was asking whether Thompson's loyalty was to an institution that could evolve and grow, or to a static tradition that could never change. The young prince was, in his own quiet way, asking Thompson to choose between the monarchy as it was and the monarchy as it could be. The days following Thompson's conversation with Prince George passed in a blur of internal turmoil. During ceremonial duties, he found himself studying the faces of tourists and onlookers with new eyes, wondering about their lives, their struggles, their opinions about the institution he had spent his career protecting. The pageantry that had once filled him with pride now felt heavy with questions he couldn't answer. Thompson began paying attention to conversations among the palace staff that he had previously ignored. In the servants' quarters, he heard whispered discussions about rising rent costs, children struggling in underfunded schools, and elderly parents who couldn't afford proper health care. These weren't abstract social problems anymore. They were the lived experiences of people he worked alongside every day. One evening, while off duty, Thompson found himself walking through the streets of London instead of returning directly to his modest flat. He passed homeless encampments that had sprung up in doorways and under bridges, their proximity to the wealth and grandeur of central London creating a stark contrast that he had somehow managed to ignore for years. A middle-aged woman sat on a piece of cardboard, holding a sign asking for help, her dignity intact despite her circumstances. Thompson stopped and really looked at her for the first time. She could have been his sister, his neighbor, anyone who had simply fallen on hard times. He reached into his pocket and gave her what money he had, but the gesture felt inadequate against the magnitude of the problem. As he walked away, he realized that Prince George's questions weren't just philosophical exercises. They were challenges to confront the real consequences of inequality in British society. Back at the palace the next day, Thompson noticed Prince George watching him during the morning ceremony. The young prince's gaze was searching, as if trying to read Thompson's thoughts. After the ceremony concluded, George approached him in the courtyard, something he had never done in such a public setting. "Sergeant Major Thompson," Prince George said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for our conversation yesterday. It helped me understand something important." The prince paused, looking around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "I've decided that I can't wait until I'm king to start making changes. I want to begin now, even if it's in small ways." Thompson felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of changes, Your Royal Highness?" "I've spoken with my parents about using part of my trust fund to establish a foundation for children like Marcus, the boy from Liverpool I told you about. Children who have potential but lack opportunities because of their circumstances." Prince George's voice carried a determination that seemed to transform him before Thompson's eyes. "My parents are concerned that it might be seen as political, but I told them that helping children shouldn't be political." The courage in the young prince's voice was unmistakable. Here was a 10-year-old boy willing to challenge centuries of royal protocol because he believed it was the right thing to do. Thompson felt simultaneously inspired and deeply uncomfortable, knowing that such changes would likely face significant resistance from within the palace hierarchy. "There's something else," Prince George continued. "I want you to help me understand what it's really like for ordinary people in Britain. Not through reports or briefings, but by actually meeting them, talking to them, learning from them. Would you be willing to accompany me on visits that aren't official royal engagements? Visits where I can just be George, not Prince George?" Thompson's mind raced through the implications of such a request. Unofficial visits would violate numerous security protocols and could potentially put the prince at risk. More importantly, they would represent a fundamental departure from how members of the royal family traditionally interacted with the public. The carefully orchestrated nature of royal visits was designed to maintain dignity and distance, not to create genuine human connections. "Your Royal Highness," Thompson began carefully, "such visits would be highly unusual. There would be security concerns, protocol violations, and likely significant opposition from your protection officers and private secretaries." Prince George nodded, as if he had expected this response. "I know it won't be easy, but I also know that if I only ever meet people in formal settings, surrounded by security and ceremony, I'll never really understand what they're going through. How can I lead people I don't truly know?" The question hung between them, and Thompson realized that Prince George was asking him to make a choice that would define not just his own future, but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. The young prince was offering him the opportunity to be part of something revolutionary, but it would require abandoning the safe, predictable world of protocol and tradition that had defined Thompson's entire adult life. Thompson spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with Prince George's request. On the 4th morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He approached the young prince during a quiet moment in the castle gardens, where George was reading beneath an ancient oak tree that had witnessed centuries of royal history. "Your Royal Highness," Thompson said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to commit to. "I will help you meet the people you want to serve, but we'll need to be very careful about how we do it." Prince George's face lit up with a smile that seemed to carry the weight of hope itself. "You really mean it? You'll help me?" "I do," Thompson replied, "but you need to understand that this decision could end my career and potentially put both of us in serious trouble. Are you prepared for those consequences?" The young prince's expression grew serious as he considered the implications. "Sergeant Major Thompson, my whole life I've been told that being royal means making sacrifices for the good of the country. If losing a career or facing trouble is the price for actually understanding the people I'm supposed to serve, then yes, I'm prepared for those consequences." Over the following weeks, Thompson and Prince George developed a careful plan. They would begin with small, seemingly innocent outings that could be explained as educational exercises. Thompson used his knowledge of palace routines and security protocols to identify windows of opportunity when such visits might be possible without immediate detection. Their first unofficial visit was to a youth center in East London, arranged through contacts Thompson had maintained from his pre-palace days. Prince George insisted on dressing in ordinary clothes and introducing himself simply as George, a detail that both touched and worried Thompson. The youth center staff had no idea they were hosting the future King of England. Thompson watched in amazement as Prince George interacted with children from backgrounds vastly different from his own. The prince listened intently as a 14-year-old girl named Amara explained how budget cuts had eliminated the art program that had given her hope for the future. He sat quietly while a boy named David described helping his mother clean office buildings at night because she couldn't find full-time work during the day. What struck Thompson most powerfully was how naturally Prince George connected with these young people. There was no condescension, no awkwardness, just genuine curiosity and empathy. The prince asked thoughtful questions and shared his own struggles with the pressure of expectations, creating bonds that transcended the vast differences in their circumstances. After their visit, as they rode back to the palace in Thompson's personal car, Prince George was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Those children are so much braver than I am. Amara wants to be an artist even though she has no money for supplies. David helps his mother every night and still gets good grades in school. They're facing real challenges, not just worrying about which fork to use at dinner." Thompson saw tears in the young prince's eyes and felt his own throat tighten. "Your Royal Highness, you're showing a different kind of courage by choosing to see what many people in your position never see. But it's not enough just to see it," Prince George replied with a determination that seemed far beyond his years. "I need to do something about it. I need to use whatever power I have to make their lives better." Over the next several months, Thompson and Prince George made regular unofficial visits to schools, community centers, and even homeless shelters. Each visit deepened the prince's understanding of social inequality and strengthened his resolve to use his position for meaningful change. Thompson found himself transformed by these experiences as well, rediscovering a sense of purpose that had been buried under decades of ceremonial routine. However, their secret was becoming harder to maintain. Other palace staff began noticing Thompson's occasional absences and Prince George's growing knowledge about social issues that weren't part of his official curriculum. Questions were being asked, and Thompson knew it was only a matter of time before their activities were discovered. The inevitable confrontation came on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Thompson was summoned to the office of the prince's private secretary, Sir Charles Pemberton, a man whose family had served the royal household for 3 generations. The meeting that followed would force Thompson to make the most difficult decision of his life, one that would ultimately lead to his resignation and change the course of the monarchy forever. Sir Charles Pemberton's office was a monument to royal tradition, its walls lined with portraits of previous monarchs and certificates recognizing decades of faithful service. Thompson had been in this room before for routine briefings, but today the atmosphere felt charged with tension. Sir Charles sat behind his mahogany desk, his expression grave and unforgiving. "Sergeant Major Thompson," Sir Charles began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience, "I've received some very concerning reports about your recent activities with Prince George. Reports that suggest you've been facilitating unauthorized visits to locations that were neither approved nor secured by the appropriate personnel." Thompson stood at attention, knowing that any attempt to deny the accusations would be futile. Palace security was thorough, and their activities had inevitably left traces that careful investigation could uncover. "Yes, sir, that is correct." Sir Charles leaned back in his chair, studying Thompson with the cold assessment of someone calculating the extent of a crisis. "Do you have any idea how seriously you've compromised the security of the heir to the throne? Do you understand that your actions could have resulted in injury or worse to Prince George?" "Sir, every precaution was taken to ensure the prince's safety," Thompson replied, though he knew his words would carry little weight against the severity of the protocol violations. "Every precaution?" Sir Charles's voice rose slightly. "You took the future King of England to homeless shelters and community centers without proper security sweeps, without advance teams, without any of the safeguards that have protected the royal family for generations. That is not taking precautions, Sergeant Major. That is reckless endangerment." Thompson felt the weight of the accusations, but also the conviction that what he and Prince George had done was fundamentally right. "Sir, if I may, Prince George wanted to understand the people he will one day serve. He wanted to see beyond the official visits and ceremonial functions. He wanted to experience reality." Sir Charles stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that conveyed both authority and frustration. Reality, Sergeant Major, is that Prince George is not an ordinary child who can wander about London making friends with whoever strikes his fancy. Reality is that his safety and security are paramount, and that his education and leadership comes through proper channels, not through unauthorized adventures that could compromise everything the monarchy represents. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Sir Charles detailing the numerous ways Thompson's actions had violated protocol, endangered the prince, and potentially exposed the royal family to criticism and scandal. Thompson listened, understanding the validity of many concerns, while remaining convinced that Prince George's desire to connect with ordinary people was not just admirable, but essential for the future of the monarchy. Finally, Sir Charles delivered the ultimatum that Thompson had been expecting. "You have a choice, Sergeant Major. You can sign a statement acknowledging your errors in judgment, commit to reporting any future unusual request from Prince George directly to this office, and continue your service under strict supervision, or you can tender your resignation and leave the palace with your pension intact and a letter of recommendation that acknowledges your years of faithful service." Without mentioning these recent irregularities, Thompson knew that accepting the first option would mean betraying Prince George's trust and effectively ending any possibility of the young prince continuing his education about real-world social issues. The second option would mean walking away from the career that had defined his adult life, but it would also protect Prince George's ability to find other ways to pursue his vision of socially conscious leadership. "Sir," Thompson said finally, "I need some time to consider my options." "You have until tomorrow morning," Sir Charles replied curtly. "But I want you to understand something clearly, Sergeant Major. Prince George is a child with admirable ideals but limited understanding of the complexities of royal responsibility. It is our job as adults to guide him appropriately, not to indulge every impulse that might seem noble, but could ultimately prove dangerous or destructive." That evening, Thompson sat in his modest flat, staring at the pictures on his mantelpiece that chronicled his decades of service. Photos of state occasions, visiting dignitaries, and ceremonial events told the story of a life dedicated to duty and tradition. But mixed among them now were newer photos from his unofficial visits with Prince George, images of the young prince laughing with children from East London, listening intently to stories from young people whose lives bore no resemblance to his own. As Thompson contemplated his choice, he realized that the question was not just about his own future, but about what kind of monarchy Prince George would inherit and what kind of king he would become. The decision he made in the next few hours would send a message about whether the institution could adapt and evolve, or whether it would remain forever trapped by the weight of its own traditions. Thompson arrived at Sir Charles Pemberton's office the next morning, with a sense of calm resolution that surprised him. He had spent the night thinking not just about his own future, but about the conversation that had started everything. Prince George's simple but profound question about whether their service was truly helping people or just maintaining a system that kept good people from having better lives. "Sir Charles," Thompson began, standing straight but relaxed, "I've made my decision. I will be submitting my resignation from the Queen's Guard, effective immediately." Sir Charles nodded, though Thompson detected a flicker of surprise in his expression. Perhaps he had expected Thompson to choose the safer path of compliance and continued service. "Very well, Sergeant Major. I'll have the necessary paperwork prepared. Your service record will reflect your years of dedication and professionalism." "Thank you, sir," Thompson replied. "But before I leave, I want you to know that everything Prince George and I did together was motivated by his genuine desire to understand and serve the British people. He's going to be an extraordinary king, but only if he's allowed to develop his own vision of what the monarchy can become." Sir Charles's expression hardened. "That is not your concern anymore, Sergeant Major. Prince George's education and development will continue under proper supervision." Later that morning, Thompson had one final conversation with Prince George in the same library where their relationship had begun. The young prince listened quietly as Thompson explained his decision, his face showing a maturity that seemed to grow deeper with each passing day. "I'm sorry," Prince George said when Thompson finished. "I'm sorry that helping me cost you your career." Thompson shook his head. "Your Royal Highness, helping you didn't cost me my career. It helped me find my purpose." For 28 years, I served the crown without really thinking about what that service meant. You taught me that real service means helping people have better lives, not just protecting institutions." Prince George was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What will you do now?" "I'm going to work with young people," Thompson replied. "There are organizations that help children like Amara and David, the ones we met during our visits. I want to use my experience and my connections to help them have the opportunities they deserve." The young prince smiled, and Thompson saw in that expression the future king that George would become, someone who understood that leadership meant service, not privilege. "That sounds perfect," George said. "And maybe when I'm older and have more control over my own schedule, we can work together again." Thompson left Windsor Castle that afternoon for the last time as a member of the Queen's Guard. As he walked through the gates he had protected for nearly 3 decades, he felt not sadness but anticipation. The conversations with Prince George had changed him fundamentally, opening his eyes to possibilities he had never considered. 6 months later, Thompson was working at a youth development center in Manchester, helping young people develop leadership skills and find pathways to higher education. The work was demanding and the pay was modest, but he found a satisfaction in it that his palace service had never provided. He was making a direct, measurable difference in individual lives. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Thompson received an unexpected visitor. Prince George, now 11 and accompanied by a single protection officer, arrived at the youth center for what was announced as an official royal visit. But Thompson recognized the gleam in the young prince's eyes. This was not just ceremony but continuation. During his visit, Prince George announced the establishment of a new royal foundation focused on youth development and educational opportunity. The foundation would work directly with community organizations like Thompson Center, providing resources and support for young people who needed them most. As he made the announcement, Prince George looked directly at Thompson and smiled. After the official ceremonies concluded, Prince George approached Thompson privately. "I told you we'd work together again," he said quietly. "I've been learning about how to make changes from within the system. It's slower than I'd like, but it's working." Thompson felt a surge of pride and hope as he realized that their conversations in the castle library had planted seeds that were continuing to grow. Prince George was finding ways to honor tradition while transforming it, to serve the crown while ensuring the crown truly served the people. Years later, when historians wrote about the reign of King George VII, they would note how his approach to monarchy differed from his predecessors, how he consistently chose substance over ceremony, service over privilege, and genuine connection over distant formality. Few would know that this transformation began with a simple conversation between a 10-year-old prince and a career soldier who had devoted his life to service, both of them brave enough to ask whether they were serving the right things in the right ways. Thompson's resignation from the Queen's Guard had indeed been the end of one kind of service, but it was also the beginning of another, one that would help shape not just individual lives but the future of the monarchy itself.